He's an armchair expert. He's an armchair expert. He's an armchair expert. He's an armchair.
Hello! Are there any armchairs here? Oh, lovely. Are the women I saw in a Volkswagen microbus? Where are you? I was walking down Lombard Street today with my family, and there was some gals in a microbus, and they said, "See you tonight," and I did want to see you. The brakes looked to be failing going down Lombard Street, so I was nervous you didn't get here. Oh, good. You're alive. You guys, this is really exciting. I'm so always flattered to get to interview you. I think this is number 3 or 4, and I hope there's many more. I've read most of your books. This one is really, really special. I'm glad you wrote it, and I'm curious why you would want to write this book.
Well, normally I like to look forward because, I'm so lucky to get to work on innovations and, want to move things as fast as possible. So when the idea of doing an autobiography came up, I was like, maybe I'll wait till I'm 80 or 90. But then I thought, okay, I am going to turn 70 this year. Microsoft will turn 50 and the Gates Foundation will turn 25. And so I thought, okay, maybe it's a good time to look back a little bit and try and figure out who put me in, such an amazing position. And when we tried to do it as a single book, I just wasn't happy. We weren't covering things. And so this idea of doing just the first start piece came up about 18 months ago. And then, I felt like, okay, I can really talk about my dad and my mom and a couple of my friends. And so it felt great. And slowly but surely, it came into view.
Yeah, just normally when you're writing, you generally are tackling. I remember the first time I interviewed you, it was about climate change, and it was how do we get to this goal. So it was very task-driven. But this, I can imagine you going, well, this is just indulgent. Why am I telling my childhood story? But I got to say, I enjoyed this more than any of the books because you are... You own some things in a unique way. One of them being, and I think most impressively, you seem to be completely shame-free about having received a ton of privilege. I don't hear a lot of people kind of own how much privilege they had. But you had a ton of it, and you're happy to acknowledge that. And I'm wondering, were you always able to do that, or was that an evolution where you actually could go, you know what, I kind of fell into some great things?
My appreciation of how amazing my parents were grew even more as I worked on the book. My appreciation of how I'd been exposed to computers in many, many cases, and I got a chance to write software, and I had amongst the very few people who knew how to write great software, these adults were critiquing my work. And so even by the age of 20, I've had thousands of hours where I'm moving to the next level in terms of, okay, how do you write the best software in the world? My whole childhood is quite idyllic. I have one, friend who passed away, but otherwise, everything that went on was so nice. So, no, I wouldn't change anything because I'm afraid it wouldn't come out the same way. Growing up in Seattle with those parents at that time and going to the school I did with those teachers, it was magical.
I think already what's been really explored, Gladwell did it, is your abnormal access to a computer. That's been well documented. The fact that you went to a high school with one, the fact that you were able to go to C-Cubed, all these, pretty rare situations you found yourself in. But I almost think what was happening on the parenting side was as improbable as all that other stuff was. So let's start with your dad, Bill. He's immediately such an appealing character. He was very ambitious, and he was maybe a little embarrassed by his father's lack of ambition. How do you think that shaped him, and how did that then trickle down to you?
Yeah, my dad was very serious about his job. He was a great lawyer. He would leave early in the morning. When he would come home at night, we'd have dinner as soon as he got there. A lot of what we talked about at the dinner table is understanding what he was up to and the challenges. And my parents would have a lot of other adult friends come, partly because they were friends, partly because it helped my dad's law career to be mixing around like that. My interaction was heavily with my mom. You know, everything about my lack of manners or being late or being sloppy. You know, my mom was in charge of all of that. And she would say from time to time, well, I'm going to have to involve your father in this. And then it'd be, oh, wait, okay, I'll shape up. Not that he would do anything, but that, you know, he was always so calm and thoughtful that, you know, and really just incredibly value-driven. My mom, you know, it was more the normal sort of, you know, intense, really great relationship, but also with some, a sense that she had very high expectations that some of the time I didn't live up to. So my dad, you know, I always thought his way of dealing with things, he dealt with them in such a straightforward, calm way, never out of emotion or anything. The world was completely understandable. There were certain values and principles that the world ran on, and he showed that to me.
Your mom came, conversely, from a pretty privileged family herself, yeah? So they had this kind of complementary, but both a desire. There was a businessness to it a little bit. You have a letter that your mom wrote your dad that kind of lays that out. Like, we have the same values. We could come together and we could create this thing together. But hers seemed to be a little bit more maybe driven by having been raised really well and wanting to continue that.
My mom had high standards and high expectations. Many of those were communicated in indirect ways. So we'd have all these families over and they'd be talking about their kids and what their kids were up to. And then after they'd leave, my mom would say, oh, it must be so tough on them that, you know, their kid didn't go to college.
Right.
And I'd be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a no-no.
You're supposed to go to college.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. Or you'll be gossiped about after you leave a dinner party.
And I said to my mom, hey, you told me to go to Harvard. And she said, no, I never said that. And she's right. There was never a moment where she sat me down and said, go to Harvard. But the idea of, hey, try to get into the hardest school you can. And, you know, I'd be very proud if you were able to do that. That was there in a strong, implicit fashion.
Yeah. And you were an absolutely terrible kid.
For a lot of my childhood, I was hard.
Yeah, I'm going to read a letter. This is from the book. This was as Bill was entering elementary school. My mother worried about me and warned my preschool teachers at Acorn Academy what to expect. At the end of my first year, the director of the school wrote, quote, his mother had prepared us for him, and she seemed to feel that he was a great contrast to his sister. We heartily concurred with her in this conclusion, for he seemed determined to impress us with his complete lack of concern for any phase of school life. He did not know or care to know how to put on his coat, and was completely happy thus. Even that wordage is so 50s. Thus. I'm also going to read kind of your own description. I like the feeling of being able to quickly absorb new facts and entertain myself with chapter books. School, however, felt slow. I found it hard to stay interested in what we were learning. My thoughts wandered. When something did catch my attention, I might leap up from my seat, fanatically raise my hand, or just shout an answer out. You also rocked compulsively during this period. You were a ferocious reader. You were just consuming material. You had read all 21 volumes of the encyclopedia by 9. Were you aware that you were different? How aware of that were you?
At least some, because in my 5th grade year, there's a teacher who's saying he's so good at math, we should push him ahead a year or two. And there's another teacher who's saying he's so
He used
out of
the R word.
control,
Yeah.
that we need to push him back, a year or two.
Yeah.
And that was definitely confusing. I did find myself very awkward socially. Other than a few nerdy boys like me, I had a hard time connecting up. In fact, because my parents had all those adults over, I actually was relatively better at talking to adults and getting them to educate me than I was with the people my own age. The rocking thing is funny because to this day, if I'm concentrating on something, without knowing it at all, I'll start going like this.
Yeah.
And it bothers some people.
I bet anyone that shares a bed with you.
It's my, okay.
Bill, hon, could you move that to the chair?
So it's my goal for after 70, I'm going to give up rocking.
Okay. When did you first, I remember the very first time I ever heard autistic was because of Rain Man. And at that same time, 60 Minutes did a segment on the real Rain Man who lived in Salt Lake City. And he was in the library reading all day and he could read both sides of the book at the same time. That was my understanding of autism. When was the first time you heard that term?
Well, I'd heard the term growing up, but it was a very narrow definition of people whose ability to socially interact was essentially non-existent.
Right.
And then as I grow older, this idea of the spectrum and Asperger's gets talked about. And I was in my 30s at Cambridge University doing an open Q&A when somebody first said to me, did I consider myself on the spectrum? And I was interested. I thought, boy, I've actually never thought about that. And I don't want to say no because what is it? Like I'm too good, for, and, I started thinking, I have those characteristics.
Right.
Particularly this thing of getting super fascinated by a topic and just going into my room and reading, and at a young age, it was a curiosity that I didn't have much control over. If the Tarzan books were sitting there and I was supposed to do something else, I'd go read the Tarzan books. By college, I had gotten to the point where I said, no, I've got 20 days to really, I haven't studied for this course, I've got 20 days, and I could direct that sort of an intense attention wherever I wanted to. But that was always strange. The extreme example that I give in the book is that they assigned us different states to write reports on. Everybody else goes off and writes a 5 or 10 page report. I wrote 170 pages.
Yeah.
And this was about Delaware.
Yeah. You had to be making shit up at some point. There's only 130 known pages to be written about Delaware.
Well, there's DuPont Corporation.
Sure.
There's the corporate courts.
Oh, you made a meal of it for sure.
But
yeah, and then you were otherwise pretty terrible in some classes. So yes, that must have been very confusing to those teachers. But when you heard about it, did it interest you? Like, I guess I think of the Big Short, right? That incredible experience. This, if you guys haven't read that book, he has the willingness to sit down and read every single bundled mortgage report and find out which ones are toxic. And he's the only guy that predicts and bets against this bubble. And he had always explained all of his differences by having a lazy eye. It made perfect sense to him. It was why he was socially awkward. And then he had a child, and the child was given the test to see if he were on the spectrum. And as he was administering this test, he's like, he doesn't on it. He's reading, and he's like, oh shit. Whoops. Yeah, okay, that one too. And he aced that test. And that was his kind of breakthrough. And then he got interested. So I was just curious what the experiences of maybe recognizing, okay, I'm a little different. Maybe this difference has a term. And did you ever become interested in that and want to learn more about that?
Oh, well, certainly, as I'm an adult having children and thinking about, gosh, what am I passing along here?
Yeah.
They've all turned out way better. But that was very interesting. But it wasn't discussed much. I have to say that even if my parents had that diagnosis, the things they ended up doing probably wouldn't have changed.
That's exactly where I wanted to go with this.
That's what's crazy is they sent me to a therapist and nobody went to a therapist then. In fact, the other customers of the therapist are all couples who aren't getting along. And so, this therapist was brilliant. He took a year to sort of gain my trust. He had me read Freud and take a bunch of tests. And he would tell me things about these couples who didn't get along. And I was like, oh,
he would vent.
Such simple problems. And then he's the one who eventually said, hey, taking your cleverness to plague your parents and making things hard for them, disagreeing with them, is a waste of your time. And it's not a proof that you're clever because they love you and it's not a fair game. So you're going to win and you shouldn't be proud of it. And yet he did that in a subtle enough way that I was like, oh God, this guy is right. And
well, he said it's kind of asymmetric war. They're going to love you endlessly and you have the power to shut them out. And that's the nuke option. But your mother kind of also needed to hear that, right?
Yeah, she did. The idea, she'd say, you owe me respect. And I'd say, I don't think I do. And
you got to earn it.
That was terrible. I mean, I'd blush. She'd say, you should go to bed at this time. And I'd say, that's really arbitrary. So
I felt guilty anytime I identified with you in the books. I'm like, I don't want to inflate my own intelligence, but things that made no sense that were being told to you. You were like, but why? Explain this to me.
Yeah, so I'm very lucky that the same time this therapist is changing my mindset and getting me to think, okay, there's no glory in giving your parents a hard time. That's when the computer comes along. That's when I meet a friend who's way more diligent and outwardly focused than I am. And so my relation with my parents did improve a lot.
I think of the strength of her to ultimately kind of lay off you, right? That's what happened. And it's not binary though, that when I look at your childhood, I think there was this perfect amount of pushing you forward to come out of your comfort zone. And I think she was very smart about doing the Camp Cheerio and getting you athletic and then putting you in Boy Scouts so you'd have built-in friends. Like it was very systematic and smart the way she did it. And then also somehow she did lay off enough that things kind of settled. I'm wondering, what do you think if you had been given that diagnosis? If you were born today, it really kind of begs the question. I look at how this worked out for you, and it seems almost like the perfect way it could have shaken out. And I wonder, do you think had you gotten a label like that, it would have been detrimental, or would it had no impact? Do you ever think about that? Like if you were on that trajectory now?
I can't see any way it would have improved things. I mean, my life is good enough. I think don't go back and change anything. It worked out pretty well. I have no complaints. But it's not like the kind of empathy that I got, and being pushed to do things, pushed to do sports, even some that I didn't like. I'm amazed my parents managed to, push me out there, including this thing of talking with adults and asking them about their careers. And then when I'm getting programming experience, I'm going to the very best programmers saying, hey, look at my code. And somehow they were always got a kick out of telling me, no, this is good. You can make this better. So yeah, I can't imagine it changing. They don't have a medicine that gets rid of this stuff. And if they did, I wouldn't take it because the benefits, for me, at least, very much outweighed even the awkwardness that I had to live through.
This would be like a superstition. I can almost imagine you not wanting to learn about it because that in understanding it somehow, it would take away your superpowers.
I like looking back to recognize that I was a little tough on my parents. And I have an older sister who got less attention than she deserved because I was just always either doing really well or doing really poorly. And she was just following the rules. And, she got good grades way before I did.
She did not pave the way for you. It was false advertising. when she came through
Yeah,
ahead
that's
of you.
right.
Yeah.
She made it look like parenting was easy.
Yeah. You own your privilege in this great way. That's refreshing. You also own your shittiness because, you were crafting at some point, as I would imagine, some answer to the awkwardness. I got it. I'm going to be the class clown. Like, this is my path. This is my lane. I'll just be the class clown. Do you remember that being a decision, or was that very natural to you?
It felt comfortable because coming up with unexpected things, my mind kind of would go there. And I have kind of that, sort of quick, just say something off the top of my head. And then I was rewarded for that. One of the things I told the teachers, they give you a grade and then they would give you the level of effort. And the one course I would always get good grades in was math. But I always said to them, you have 1 for working really hard, 2 for working medium hard, 3 if you're just totally lazy. And I said to the teacher, I want an A3.
Right.
I want the maximum output for the least input. That's what we're trying to optimize in this world. And, they always thought that was funny. They never gave me that.
You wanted to be seen as lazy and brilliant.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a weird.
Now, that was my shtick. And then when I went to the private school, that was not a niche that really existed. If it was kind of, you're a moron type niche.
Yes, and there were some penalties, which is if you were a dum-dum, you had to go to study hall and you had no freedom. And then if you were an upper student, you got to roam around and pursue your own interests. So you found an incentive as well, in that.
Yeah, so in 8th grade, I realized this isn't working. I went to the private school in 7th, and then in 8th grade, I said, no, I got to change my positioning away from being the clown.
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and be a serious student. And partly my best friend was a serious student. And so I wanted to be in free study with him. And that's when I really decided, okay, in 9th grade, I am going to know the answers, not just in math class. I'm going to know the answers in all the classes. I still a little bit wanted to pull off and I don't try hard things. So I had a set of books at the school and a set of books at home. And in my imagination, people were noticing he never takes his books home. How does he do it? We have to give him an A3.
I mean, surely some of these kids were also a bit neurodivergent, yeah?
Yep.
So Paul is Paul Allen. You're an 8th grader. He's a 10th grader. Describe Paul at that time.
Yeah, so Paul is 2 years ahead of me, which in this social circumstance is very different. You can see him there, It doesn't look
He looks
like
a teacher.
Yeah. So I'm
Mr.
in that
Allen.
picture, I'm 13 and he's 15. So one of us looks young for our age and the other one looks old.
You look like different species, yeah.
But because I had done super well on this math exam, as that terminal connected to a big computer.
I'll break for you. Only the high school kids were on the math team, but they let the 8th grader take it, and he scored the very highest score.
Yeah. And so Paul, no. So Paul kind of taunts me and says, hey, we're trying to figure this thing out. You think you're so smart, come and help us figure this out. And so when the computer terminal shows up, at first, everybody's in that terminal room that you see right there, and the teachers, lots of students. But within 60 days, there's 4 of us left.
Right.
Rick and Paul, who are 2 years ahead, and Kent Evans and myself, my best friend. We are just so fascinated by the idea of what can we get this computer to do? I do a tic-tac-toe program. I do a Monopoly program. And we're just fascinated. How does it work? And what are the limitations? And that begins sort of our obsession. Eventually, the money that the Mothers Club gave for that ran out. And so we were lucky we got another chance. But anyway, those 2 older boys, they were nice to spend time with us at all.
Yeah.
And then we created what we called the Lakeside Programming Group, where we were thinking, okay, how do we get our next computer experience? Computers were very, very expensive. It's almost hard to recreate because the sort of 2 timing miracles for me, one is the exposure to software and learning how to write software. But the other is that Paul sees that this microprocessor in this funny place called Silicon Valley is being invented, and Intel is proceeding at an exponential rate, as predicted by Gordon Moore with Moore's Law, to make computing exponentially cheaper. And when Paul says that to me, I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. Why isn't everybody just shocked? It's going to mean computers will be everywhere. Anyway, so those two things, come from this group of 4 boys where we're doing more and more stuff, the 4 of us for quite some time, just to learn how to write better software.
Stay tuned for more Armchair Expert, if you dare.
This part of the book is so unbelievably heartwarming. This guy, Kent, is such a wonderful character. He himself was born with some mouth...
cleft palate. Yep.
Yeah, he had tons of different surgeries. He, in spite of all that, with this will to be... He's writing the story of his life, and he is the fucking hero of the story. And it's infectious. And you two are really 2 peas in a pod. So tell us some of the bizarre things Kent was doing at 13.
So Kent would say things like, well, what are we going to do? And I'd be like, what do you mean? And he'd say, are we going to be professors? Are we going to be ambassadors? Are we going to be generals? And I'd be like, wow, you are thinking ahead here, man. That's very impressive. And he was following politics. He got me reading Fortune magazine, where you see, the biggest 500 companies, and this company's doing well, this company's not doing well. And there's this, profit thing where you take your costs and you subtract that from your sales. And
you guys were getting public records from businesses in town to find out what CEOs in the area were making, right?
Yeah,
you figured out the bank guy was making $1 million a year, and then you tabulated his stock options, and you're like, this guy's got $15 million. What 13-year-olds are doing that?
It blew our mind. And so he and I are best friends. We talk every night. And, we're thinking through, and a lot of these computer adventures we're doing together. And then in junior year of high school, when he's 17 and I'm 16, it's surprisingly Kent, who did a lot of things that were unexpected, he signs up to do mountain climbing.
He's the captain of the boat. The parents, like your parents, are letting him just operate as a 30-year-old man. He carries a briefcase to school.
Like a lawyer, yeah.
Yeah, a humongous briefcase with his Forbes magazines, and he wants to start a business, right? Like you guys are sharing this passion that you get the sense, oh my God, we are going to do something incredible. You know that. You're on a course to do that. Before you talk about him at 17, I want to tell everyone, you guys got this contract to build a payroll software. Paul, Rick, you, and Kent got. And Paul and Rick fired you and Kent because you were annoying. And you told Paul when you were leaving, you're going to regret this. It's more complicated than you think. And then when Paul admitted that was true and invited you guys back, you and Kent devised that you should split up this contract into 11ths. You gave Paul what you said was an insulting 1/11th of the contract. You gave Rick 2 11ths, and you and Kent each got 4 11ths. This is the dude, Kent. I mean, he is Bill Gates. Like, the fact that there were 2 of them and they met is not possible.
Yeah, so as part of our progression of getting access to computers, we had that initial experience just running basic programs. Then a company got a computer where they didn't have to pay for it if they could find bugs. So they hired us without paying us. We came in as these free monkeys to kind of bang on it. But that was great because we learned a lot. That company went bankrupt. And then so another company said, if you will write a payroll program, we will give you free computer time. And Rick and Paul didn't get that there's all these reports and taxes and overtime.
There's Social Security deductions, there's 401k planning.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's actually quite complicated. And you have the different states and the federal government. And so Rick and Paul just haven't paid attention. And I'm a little rude to them. I say, okay, you can fire me, but if you want my help, I will be in charge, and I will be in charge thereafter. And
Do you think you were emboldened by Kent at all? Or
Yes.
you would have done all that anyway?
both Kent and I actually are more alike
Yes.
than
You and
Paul. Paul is wonderful. He's super necessary. He's a deep conceptual thinker.
Yeah.
But the idea of hiring a bunch of people
Yeah.
and behaving like an adult,
Anything operational.
He just had no interest in that stuff. And he knew that there were a few people in the world, like Kent and I, who were like, okay, we can, go and figure this stuff out. But the payroll program was so boring to them. And it's using a computer language called COBOL. And we actually find
We all know COBOL.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
It's got the data
Don't
division,
insult
the
us.
picture division. Anyway,
I got to say, my favorite story in the book is you guys finishing, and they're going to go from Seattle to Portland, where this ISI company is, to present this payroll program. And you're 15, they're 17. They take a 4-hour bus ride, a crack ass early in the morning. They're wearing suits and ties and carrying briefcases. And they go into this ISI and they're charmed by these kids and the fucking program works. And then they take them to lunch in Portland where all the businessmen go to lunch. That's the picture I want, is you guys in your suits at 15.
well, and the crazy thing is, I was so worried, God, what if this program doesn't work? I mean, this means people aren't going to get paid. I mean, this is...
You got a lot on your shoulders.
This is more serious than tic-tac-toe and Monopoly.
People's livelihoods on your
Yeah.
shoulders. Yeah. Okay, so you guys are that close, and obviously, if the story stopped there, I would predict these two are going to go on to absolutely rule the world in some capacity as partners. Okay, and then at 17,
Yeah, so Kent decides to sign up for a mountain climbing course, and he's even less naturally coordinated than I am. But his parents, gave him a lot of rope, just like my parents gave mine. I did normal hiking. I never did any of the stuff where you had to, put crampons on and use ropes
Belay
and things
and
like
all
that.
those.
Didn't do it. And so he's off training on this climbing course. I talked to him Friday night like I always did, and he was going to be gone on the weekend. And then that Sunday, I get a call at home from the headmaster, which that is pretty scary. And then, he says to me, no, Kent not only was injured, but he's died. And I'd never had anybody young, just disappear. And he was such a central part of my life. I mean, I still know his phone number. Then we had a funeral at the school. I was supposed to speak. I was unable to speak. And then, for Kent's parents, this was even more of a permanent tragedy than it was for me.
yeah. And so you pretty much just kept flying forward. But then Paul, and this is obviously the beauty of Paul Allen's spirit, is you sense he kind of knows you need him, and he agrees to come and leave college and help you finish this scheduling program, which is so sweet and beautiful. I mean, what a wonderful thing. And through that next month and a half of cramming and working, you guys lived in the lab at school, slept on cots. You guys kind of re-fall in love in that period, yeah?
Yeah, so we really bond in this intense schedule thing. Paul decides it's time to get me drunk.
Yeah.
Paul decides it's time for me to take pot.
Take pot.
So
The burnouts wouldn't have had you if you called it take.
he's into this Jimi Hendrix "Are You Experienced" thing.
Yeah.
So he decides he's going to remedy my
He
lack.
wants you to do acid quite badly.
That comes later.
Yes, but he's already telling you also need to become
That
experienced.
may be what Jimi Hendrix meant. We don't know.
But yeah, he gets you drunk, he gets you stoned, and you guys develop a working relationship that then really takes off. So I just wonder have you spent time wondering what your and Kent's future would have been? It seems like you, in the book, admittedly, just tried your best to ignore the whole thing. But in those moments where you reflected, have you ever thought of that? Like, what would have?
I think we would have chosen to go to the same college, and the whole software thing, we were excited about. We would have tried to involve Paul and Rick, although the dynamics of 4 people doing something together might have gotten complicated. As I'm really bonding with Paul, and Paul amazingly, when I go to Harvard, he has me help him get a job back in Boston so he can be there to bug me.
Yeah.
That, hey, we've seen the revolution is coming, let's get a company started. And he's impatient about that. Yeah. And so I end up in the Microsoft phase having 2 key partners, Paul in terms of his deep conceptual thinking, but it's only later that a friend that I have at Harvard, Steve Ballmer, comes in, and he sort of plays the role that perhaps Kent would have.
Yeah, right.
That I have a business partner, somebody who, it's natural to think through the profit and loss and the taxes and the marketing and all those things. And so I'm, just super lucky to later get Steve. But yes, I got together with Kent's parents from time to time. And at the end of the book, literally, so I'm working on the book, I run into Kent's father and we talk about, how amazing he was and what, he might have been a big part of.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking. He clearly was a type like you. But also, I would imagine you could argue you guys actually wouldn't have been the weird synthesized version that you and Paul became. Is it possible also that you didn't need another version of you, that you needed Paul?
Well, yeah, Paul brought some unique things. And Paul and I always had this argument about, was the greatest science done by individuals, kind of like an Einstein, or was it done by project teams, kind of like a Los Alamos bomb project? And of course, the answer is that it's done both ways. Things did work well with Paul because that vision of, okay, what's going to happen? The one big difference between Paul and I was that he wanted to make hardware. So there's another great photo of us. Where I'm trying to look old by now. And
Paul does look like a guy you'd call the cops on if he was at a playground without a kid. You might go, let's just get this guy's ID. He's with this young boy with feathered hair. Let's just make sure everything's on the up and up.
Getting him drunk.
Yeah. Imbibing him with.
Paul knew hardware better than I did. And that was a strength because he was the one who kept showing me what was going on in the chip industry, specifically what Intel was doing, where it's 1971, the 8008, which is in the right direction, but not good enough. And then in 73, the 8080, which is more powerful. It's a chip that is $300, but if it's put into a computer, it's more powerful than a $20,000 mini computer, like a PDP-8 that Dax sold. So when Paul shows me the 8080 and he says, can we do a personal computer based on this? I say, absolutely. This thing's phenomenal. And that's when he wants us to do hardware. And I'm saying to him, no, we're not uniquely good at like soldering parts together. It turns out people like Steve Wozniak knew how to do that. Why don't we just do the software? Which was a little weird because there was no such thing as a software company. But once you decide that computing is going to be free, then the idea that, okay, the software magic will be the key element, and eventually people will want to pay for that, that seemed pretty clear to me. And so we took his vision and my interpretation, and that's the founding dream vision of Microsoft.
Yeah, he sprints to your house in December of '74, holding the electronics magazine, announcing the Altair, right?
Exactly. So yeah,
that's his like, holy shit, it's here moment, right?
Right, because he moves all the way back to Boston. These winters are a little bit cold and depressing, and we're saying we've got to be in the ground floor of this thing. So this looks like the revolution might start without us. That's the kid computer. It cost $300 because they had a volume deal to get the chips from Intel for about $70. And if you added a terminal and some memory, that machine could run the Microsoft's very first product, this basic interpreter. And so they became our very first customer. In fact, we moved to Albuquerque. I finally do drop out, or go on leave was the official thing, because this thing is the starting line of the personal computer revolution.
You elect to take Math 55, and that is going to set you on a very specific trajectory. Your goal at that point is to do pure math, right? You're going to have a math breakthrough. That's why someone would be on that path. And up until you got there, you were the best at math in Washington, per an award you won. Yeah. But when you got into these deeper and deeper into this Math 55 and the original 80 that showed up went down to 25, and you're working with two friends, Andy and
Jim.
Jim. You start to accept that you actually aren't going to be able to do that.
Everybody in this class is the best math person they've ever met, and their personal positioning is, I am the best math person I have ever met. And so most of us are frauds. And we're looking around the room trying to figure out, oh God, are we really good at this or not? Well, the teacher is this mythic theoretical mathematician who's made it his career. And although I wasn't sure I wanted to do that, it is kind of the ultimate of how smart am I? Am I able to contribute to the field of mathematics? Because the frontiers are way out there. And this class was absolutely fantastic. I did quite well in the class, but it clearly cured me of any view that I was so good at math that I'd be able to make a profession out of being a mathematician. And that had been my hierarchy of, okay, that's pure intelligence. This computer stuff is kind of trivial compared to this math stuff. And so, various friends were saying, well, you're lucky you have this computer thing you're really, really good at. And I'm like, but it's not as hard as this thing.
Throughout the book, you're also pretty honest about your own ego throughout this ride. You are always the smartest one. You're getting the best grades on the tests, and you're doing some pretty phenomenal things that are obvious. The intelligence becomes a bit of a defense mechanism, right? Which is, I could feel really terrible about this social awkwardness, but instead I'm going to really just focus on this kind of intellectual superiority I have. And I wonder how one manages their ego, because you have to have it and too much is destructive. And I just think there were these moments where your ego could have gotten the best of you in that math moment. You could have doubled down and said, no, I have to prove I can be this. But you do seem to be able to pivot at times when you can take on that information. How was your ego hard to manage, and how did you do it?
Well, definitely, because I decided, okay, my academic excellence is part of how I'll get along socially. Yeah. And I will have a known behavior, and so I'll be predictable, and I'll know who to sit with and who to talk to. One of the weird things I did after I decided, okay, I'm not going to be a pure mathematician, I decided to be the kid who never attended any class that I was signed up for.
This is the books 2.0.
Exactly. Yeah. This is, the next iteration. So I attend one set of classes, and I sign up for another set of classes. And then at the end of the semester, they have a 20-day period called reading period. And I made sure to only take classes that one way of being graded was that it was all based on your final results. So during the 20 days, I would take my ability to concentrate and really push it to the limit that I was working day and night. And so people got a kick out of that. You know, so I was the guy who never went to his classes.
Yeah, that's cool.
So I still felt comfortable.
Is that cool guy who takes pot occasionally and never goes to class and aces everything?
Stay tuned for more Armchair Expert, if you dare.
You are able to pivot, and I wonder, you had to do it again because I could imagine your identity was also, I'm a great programmer. Was there a distinct moment where you thought, okay, I'm going to have to lay down the mantle of greatest programmer in this company and be an operational genius, right? I'm going to have to give that up in a sense, in the way you had to give up your math identity.
Yeah, that was hard because there's a certain beauty to the code you write and you craft it. And the idea that other people are going to write code, well, it's never going to be as good. And so it's kind of a compromise. So at first I thought, okay, I'll review all the code. So I'll make sure it's good. Then it was, well, I'll at least hire the people that write the code. And then eventually, because we were so ambitious, the idea of this software factory where we'd be writing all kinds of software, I had to say, no, my value added is much more on the strategy, the tools that make us the most efficient software factory in the world, the way that we go out and hire better people than other people do, and going out and building, a global company and filling in sales and marketing and those things. So I wanted to push. And so it never crossed my mind to not be the leader, to be the CEO, but I did have to give up this notion that we were a handcrafted company. Now, of course, memory is getting bigger and cheaper. So the idea that you have to fine tune to fit into these little amounts of memory, which was so cool in the early days, that became unnecessary.
Right. Your first task when designing software for the Altair was to fit BASIC into 4K
bytes, which means not 4 megabytes or 4 gigabytes. It means 4,096 8-bit memories where I have to do the basic interpreter, I have to store your program, and I have to store your variables all in 4K.
Right.
And then we went on, it's a little later, the original Mac only has 128K. And it's very hard to write software for these tiny amounts of memory, and our software tools were really good at that. So yes, the craftsmanship, we tried to keep that, but then I chose, no, I am going to be a manager and lead the company. And so I had to learn all sorts of different things and learn how to bring in a few adults who brought with them experience in sales and marketing and finance and all those other things.
Part of that, to me, the theme there is like the difference between being a specialist and a generalist. And it would appear to me that you had a fantasy and you are active in crafting a lot of identities that you must have been drawn to the specialists. Those were the people in history. And at some point, you must recognize you became kind of a great generalist, right? You were understanding a lot of aspects of this business that most programmers were not. Do you remember that kind of moment, or was it even hard for you to let go of?
Well, I a little bit had my cake and eat it too in the early days, that I was the leader and setting the strategy and figuring out, okay, how do we price this stuff? There's one episode in there where I get mad at people for stealing the BASIC because kind of the personal computer counterculture view was, hey, software should be free. And so I wrote a letter sort of saying, no, don't steal my software. And some people thought that
Ed loved that, the owner of the company.
Yeah, the guy who ran the computer company got mad at me because I was insulting his customers.
Calling his customers thieves.
Calling them crooks. So I did apologize for that. But then I did have to give up that individual contributor and that hands-on management piece in order, to run the company. But there was never a doubt in my mind, that I could see the next step of what we could do. And I enjoyed building that team and eventually, bringing in adults who had to sign up for our revolution, but they brought some deep skills. And things were moving very quickly, and during my 20s, I was monomaniacal. I really just worked. I didn't believe in weekends, vacations, and that my life was Microsoft.
Yeah, while you're in your first year at Harvard, you're taking classes you're not enrolled in, you're testing for classes you're enrolled in, you have a traffic counting business, you're trying to write software and monitor traffic flow. You have the scheduling thing you're still doing for Lakeside. You're doing 150 things. And you're quite honest in the book about girls were not in the equation at all. You liked Vicky, you joined theater, you maybe were gonna get a date with her that didn't pan out, but all the way into college, you're not spending any time on girls.
I would have been glad to.
I know. You made that very clear, and I appreciate it.
By some choice.
Yeah, right, you weren't a monk.
Through pure ineptness.
Yeah.
I'm still staring at them.
Yeah, you loved that your school got co-eded halfway through. Like, it's very clear you would have been interested in that.
I would have traded off. I would have given up some of those
That's
other
exactly
things.
my question. And that's the excuse I was making for myself for not accomplishing anything spectacular. It's like, I was fucking busy.
So to speak.
And I don't regret it. Do you think it was a blessing? I'm sincere in that there's no way you could have done all those things and also had a girlfriend.
Not very sad. No, she wouldn't have been very happy.
No.
And yes, the idea that I traded off everything in favor of that, even my desire to learn lots of subjects, which I enjoy a lot, from 1975 into the year 2000, I didn't let myself stay up to date on, biology, chemistry, a tiny bit towards the end. And then towards the end, I do moderate a little bit towards the end. Weekends started to show up. I did eventually have a great girlfriend towards the late in that period.
Is that through Ballmer?
No.
Oh, because Ballmer's kind of doing both things, right? He's kind of a stud. He was a football player.
He was not. There weren't that many girls. We'll let him write his book, but neither of us were getting that much female attention.
You don't have to work out a code or anything in your dorm.
No.
You're free to barge right in at any time. Don't even knock.
Well, we in the early days, we did believe in sharing a hotel room because we were just so frugal.
Right.
Coach.
And again, no threat of women coming by. So.
No threat.
Yeah. There's a couple things, and I've gotten to know you a little bit, and there's some really fun, surprising things about you. A lot of them are in the book. It goes against the bit of the stereotype, and I guess you're the prototype for the computer geek. Just you were the first, so. Like, I was trying to think of when I saw Revenge of the Nerds, and I'm like, oh yeah, he was already 9 years into Microsoft, so. But what's really clear to me is you have a deep, deep sense of romanticism. Do you see that about yourself? You're someone that clearly was always daydreaming of the future and thinking of identities and thinking of who you could be in these different situations. And do you feel that you're that way, deeply romantic in a way?
Yeah, romantic, thinking ahead, imagining that great things might happen, sort of bringing a sense of optimism and ambition to it. Okay, could this company be really big? Or, could personal computers solve these things? I mean, even today, in our foundation work, we have to think very ambitiously about it. But yes, that dreaming big and then thinking, okay, if you want to make that happen, what is the practical step to actually do it? I was blessed with a very positive view and a desire to think through those big goals.
How were you able to take on feedback when it was necessary? How you somehow were very, very confident. The book's full of stories of you being a little too confident and at times, but you also seem to have this ability to take on reality when it's necessary.
Business is a great thing because, are you attracting the best people to come work for you? Are those people staying and working for you? Do the customers like working with you? We're having to figure out how to do that in the United States and in countries around the world. And just hiring people to join our team, I had to get good at that. Initially, I'm mostly using the way I manage myself, which is to be very tough on myself. If I don't understand something, I'll be like, hey, you're too lazy, shouldn't do this. So that management style works for the original group of Microsoft people. Our group down in Albuquerque was almost all programmers. And so it was very natural for me to manage them because it was how I managed myself.
Yeah.
Then I had to broaden it to manage people differently, not expect ridiculous hours, or to appreciate that just because you're smart at coding doesn't mean you understand other things. And in particular, the shock to me was that really good programmers, many of them were not good at managing. In fact, there was like a negative correlation. Some of the really best programmers were the most pathetic managers.
Yeah.
And I had this notion of, we'll have a hierarchy where you'll never have to work for somebody who's a worse programmer than you are. And I realized that was never going to work. And bringing Steve in, all these things about, okay, how do we really manage people? And then bringing in adults like John Shirley, Mike Maples, Frank Goddard, they moderated us. And we wanted to learn. I mean, I had gone many times, gone overboard and had a little bit of comeuppance. Like I'm in a course at Harvard where I sign up for the highest course in the computer science catalog.
It's a graduate class.
Graduate course with 3 graduate courses as prerequisites. It's about operating system scheduling. And 2 weeks into the thing, I'm sitting there and he's explaining why a certain scheduling algorithm is the best when he has like 100 different jobs. And I say to him, no, you're completely wrong. That algorithm just ran the simple jobs. It didn't, in a sense, make the good progress. And I was just as rude as I could be, and he tried to explain why I was wrong, and I left the classroom. And then about a half hour later, I realized I am completely wrong. And it's like, holy shit. And this guy couldn't have been nicer about it. I went back and he became one of
that's the surprising part of the story. It's not that you had an impulse control issue. That makes total sense. It was that you regrouped and you went to and apologized to him. That's kind of the skill that was a little bit interesting.
My mom would often push back at me. That's another anecdote in there, is that when my freshman advisor was having me talk about things I was doing, he said I was precocious. And I went to my friends and I said, wow, I really screwed up. The guy says I'm precocious. Well, I'd never heard the word precocious without it being precocious brat.
Right. From Mary.
And from my mom.
Yeah.
And no, my friend said to me, no, look up the word. It's actually not inherently negative. I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, I went overboard enough times to slowly but surely a little bit, gain some self-awareness. And then being in, a company does really force you. This whole thing where I would, pretend not to work hard and all, I had to give all that up. When you start a company,
no one's going to be impressed.
Yeah, no one's impressed that you're, I pretended not to come in to work.
It's A1 time, not A3.
So I flip to literally knowing people's license plates, so I know exactly when they come in and when they leave and all this. So
Anderson Cooper, who we just did a book event with a few weeks ago, showed a license plate up on the screen and he knew, right? You knew still.
Which employee, yeah.
Yeah.
A really lazy guy.
Surprised you could memorize it. It's probably never in the parking lot.
Well, he didn't make it.
Paul obviously ended up coming along for the ride, and Rick, back from Lakeside, he was involved at the beginning, and he ended up moving to California and stuff. Do you have any sadness when you think, some of these people could have taken the whole ride?
You know, I always...
Do you ever offer these guys like $1 billion for Christmas?
When Paul got cancer and decides not to keep working at Microsoft, I was super disappointed by that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, he kept his stock and he did okay.
Yeah.
You know, Rick decides that living down in LA is going to fit the stuff he's trying to explore.
Yeah.
Because he's gay at a time when that's a little more troubling to deal with. And
what did his license plate say in New Mexico?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. He got a Corvette with Yes, I Am in the 70s in Albuquerque. That's a brave motherfucker right there. Rick!
Even though he leaves us very early on, he keeps enough shares.
Okay.
So he gives literally hundreds of millions to LGBTQ causes. He's one
it
of
all worked out.
It did.
Oh, great. Because he's such a sweet character in the story. And I tried to look him up to find out what he's sitting on, and I didn't find that.
Yeah, well, it's kind of unusual. Of the 4 boys who were in that group, you know, Kent dies young in the mountain climbing accident.
Yeah.
Paul has cancer, so he quits, although he lives until, about 9 years ago. Mm-hmm. Rick, unfortunately, he was dealing with HIV. He had a lot of mental ups and downs, and he eventually, this is about 15 years ago, kills himself.
Oh, no.
So it's very strange to me that of the 4 of us, I'm the only one still around.
I'm glad you're around, though. Okay. I have a whole section called Rascaliness. I think Bill's more rascally than everyone knows about. There's some fun rascally stories. First of all, you were completely leaving your house all night long at 13 years old to go down to C Cubed and work. Fuck it, I guess, is what you thought. You have a good deal of rascaliness. Would you agree? You seem to not care terribly much about the rules at times. It's a little against the stereotype.
No, I would willingly break the rules, but also parents there wasn't this safety obsession. The idea that you were out playing around in the neighborhood or that I was off camping or hiking, parents just didn't think, no matter what, we should pick the most safe thing for the kid to do. My parents paid a lot of attention. They were amazing. But I think particularly boys in this age, you know, even when my parents figure out a few years later I'm going out at night, they're not like,
they don't mind.
Know, this is incredibly bad.
Right.
They're like, hey, be careful.
Okay, so everyone will be happy to know that after the pot and the booze, you did do acid. And this sounds like one of the worst acid experiences I've ever heard. And I've been in AA for 22 years, so I've heard a lot of stories, but talk about taking acid on senior skip day.
Yeah, so...
Would you guys have thought Bill did acid? I was pretty excited about that.
I blame Paul. So, yeah, eventually that night, there was acid there, and I was kind of clueless about what an extreme. I thought, okay, maybe an hour or something, and it really, I'm like, it's completely psychedelic. And then I realized that I have an orthodontist surgery the next morning, and I consider not going, but. You know, I'm going to leave to go to Harvard, and
You
there's
gotta
not
get
going to be
this
much
surgery, yeah.
chance. Anyway, I don't recommend that juxtaposition.
Yeah, do you have vivid memories of sitting down? My first thought would be like, well, they're medical professionals. They're going to quickly discover I'm on acid. It would be my first fear. But yeah, what was that, the intensity of that?
Much worse than I expected.
Yeah. You did do acid another time and said that was about the last time I did it, leaving the door open to maybe there's a half dozen experiences. Hopefully you'll write about those. Were you at all concerned like, ooh, I don't want to tamper with this thing? You knew that was your asset. That feels a little...
Yeah, I had two contradictory things, which is I was a huge risk taker.
Right.
And so I was, wanting to understand new things. And the idea that my brain, I didn't want to mess with it. And so after a couple of these trips, I'd be like, God, does my brain still work? Did I erase a lot of information?
Yeah.
Because I remember thinking, maybe I'll zero out my memory and see if that works.
Yeah. That was the thought you had while tripping, right?
While tripping, let's deposit zeros throughout the memory. And
I can't imagine being in your brain on acid. Oh. Those people are like, you think there's life after death? And you were running code. Okay, another fun thing about you is you have a lead foot. You've been ticketed you've been arrested for speeding. And one thing I'm so proud of you about, and you're embarrassed to admit it, is like you were living in a shithole in Albuquerque and you took the first amount of money you had and bought a 911 Turbo Porsche. Yeah.
that was a great car.
Yeah. Do you know how many tickets you've gotten?
The mythic thing was when I drove from Albuquerque to Seattle. So, we decided at the start of 1979 to leave Albuquerque and move to Seattle. And I got, one ticket for doing like 100 miles an hour in Arizona. Then I come into California and I'm doing 115 on I-5.
Sure.
And I see somebody gaining from behind me. And I think, that's probably the California Highway Patrol. Anyway, so I got 2 tickets. They don't call them speeding tickets if you go fast enough. They call them reckless driving tickets. But I've been wise enough that I had already switched from my New Mexico license to my Washington license before I took this trip.
Right,
And
smart.
so I was handing out my New Mexico license that I knew was going to be trashed.
Yeah. So your dad's credit card.
So
Ring it up.
I was fine.
Okay, I guess I just want to close with something personal, which is I only tend to defend 2 people that are in the public. My wife, who I'll die for. And I defend you. I get so irritated when people come for you because I'm like, person on Twitter, how many lives have you saved? Just hit me with that because Bill's in the fucking millions and you're coming for him and it drives me crazy. My other issue is that people have accused Bill of keeping children in his basement and draining their body of adrenochrome to keep himself young. And as much as I adore you and worship you, it's not working. It'd be one thing if you looked 45, but you look good for your age, but you're not reeling back the clock with this adrenochrome. Sounds like a lot of wasted effort. But I had the privilege of going with you for a week last year to India. And the things I were blown away with, the amount of stories I got in just that week, it's such a highlight of my life. And I thank you for it so much. To go to these many different places and learn that when the Gates Foundation started, what was the infant mortality rate at that time? It was
over 10 million kids a year. And then we get it down to under 5 million.
Yeah, I think when we first met, I told you my very favorite book I've ever read is Titan, the biography on John D. Rockefeller. And what is so fascinating about Rockefeller is how many things we've benefited from that people don't know, aside from Standard Oil. It's like inventing research medicine, curing the South of hookworm, starting colleges that were biracial, just one thing after another, really changing the world, going onward forever. And I am deeply grateful that we have someone like you on earth with your resources in your brain that is actually trying all day long to make this place better. We all owe you here an enormous debt of gratitude, and our kids will, and their kids will. And you're a fucking great guy. So thanks for letting me be alone. Yeah.
Well, nobody's luckier than I am. Great job.
Thank you. Thanks everybody so much. Read source code.